Before the food reached her, it would pass through many hands. As the emperor's favorite, she needed to consider the possibility that someone might try to poison it. Therefore, a food taster was necessary. Everyone was on edge because of what had happened to the young prince. Rumors were rampant that the princess might have been sickened by the same poison the infant boy died from. The ladies-in-waiting hadn't been informed of what the toxic substance ultimately was. They were understandably paranoid that it might be in anything or everything. It would not have been strange if they had viewed the lowly servant girl sent to them at that moment, specifically to be a food taster, as nothing but a disposable pawn. Maomao was tasked with tasting consort Gyokai's meals. She also tasted the baby food served to the princess. When His Majesty was present, she sampled the luxurious edibles offered to him as well. After it was discovered that Gyokai was pregnant, Maomao understood that there had been 2 separate instances of attempted poisoning. In one instance, the taster had escaped with only minor injury. However, another taster had been affected by a nerve toxin, which paralyzed their arms and legs. The remaining ladies-in-waiting, quite fearful and trembling, had to check the food themselves. Therefore, they were certainly grateful for Maomao's arrival. Maomao furrowed her brow as she looked at the plate before her. It was ceramic. If they are so scared of poison, they should be using silver. She picked up a small piece of pickled vegetable with her chopsticks and looked at it carefully. She took a sniff. Then she placed it on her tongue, checking for a tingling sensation before she swallowed. I do not think I am actually qualified to be tasting for poisons, she reflected. Fast-acting agents were one thing, but regarding slower toxins she expected to be somewhat useless. In the name of science, Maomao had accustomed her body to a variety of poisons through gradual exposure. She suspected few poisons remained that would have a serious effect on her. This was not part of her work as an apothecary, but simply a way of satisfying her intellectual curiosity. In the West, she had heard they had a name for researchers who did things that made no sense to people. They called them mad scientists. Even her father, who had taught her the apothecary's trade, grew exasperated with her little experiments. When she was satisfied that there were no untoward physical effects, and that she detected no poisons she knew of, the meal could finally make its way to consort Gyokaiu. Next would come the flavorless baby food. She said to Hongyang as flatly as possible, I think it might be best to change the plates to ones made of silver. She had been called to Hongyang's room to report on her first day of work. The chief lady's chambers were large, but not decorated with any unnecessary objects. This showed Hongyang's practical nature. Hongyang, an attractive black-haired woman who was not quite 30 years of age, let out a sigh. Jinshi really had it all figured out. She confessed with some chagrin that they had deliberately not used silver tableware at the eunuch's instruction. Maomao had a distinct suspicion that it was also Jinshi who had ordered her appointed as food taster. She tried not to let her already cold expression become one of outright disgust as she listened to Hongyang talk. Hongyang said, I don't know why you decided to hide your knowledge. It is amazing that you know so much about poisons and medicine. If you had told them from the start that you knew how to write, you could have gotten a lot more money. My knowledge comes from my vocation. I was an apothecary until I was abducted and sold into this place. My kidnappers receive a portion of my salary even now. The thought turns my stomach. Maomao's hackles were up now, and her words came in a sharp rush. However, the chief lady-in-waiting did not rebuke her. You mean you were willing to put up with receiving less than you were worth to make sure they had one less cup of wine when they were carousing? Hongyang seemed perceptive enough to grasp Maomao's motives. Maomao was simply relieved that Hongyang hadn't scolded her for what she said. Hongyang explained that women of no special distinction usually served a couple of years and then went on their merry ways. There were plenty of replacements available. Maomao didn't have to understand it quite that well. Hongyang then took a carafe from the table and gave it to Maomao. What's this? Maomao asked. Almost as soon as the words were out of her mouth, a pain shot through her wrist. She dropped the carafe on the floor in her shock. A large crack spidered through the ceramic vessel. Oh my goodness, that is quite an expensive piece of pottery. Certainly not something a simple lady-in-waiting could afford. You will not be able to send money to your family anymore with that debt hanging over your head. In fact, we should probably send them the bill. Maomao understood immediately what Hongyang was saying. A slight ironic smile crept over her otherwise expressionless face. "My profound apologies," she said. "Please deduct it from the amount of my salary that is sent home each month. And if that isn't enough, by all means take it from my own share as well. Thank you. I will make sure the matron of the serving women knows to do that. And one more thing." Hongyang put the broken carafe back on the table. Then she took a wood strip roll out of a drawer and wrote on it in quick, short strokes. "This details your additional salary as a food taster. Hazard pay, you might call it." The amount was almost as much again as Maomao was currently receiving, and insofar as nothing would be taken from it to pay her captors, Maomao came out ahead. "This woman does know how to use the carrot," she thought as she bowed deeply and left the room. Chapter 7 Branch. The 4 ladies in waiting who had always attended Consort Jyokayu were exceptionally hard workers. The Jade Pavilion was not the largest place, but the 4 of them kept it running neatly. Serving girls from the Shankin, the housekeeping service responsible for cleaning rooms, did come sometimes. However, the 4 ladies in waiting generally handled all the cleaning and tidying themselves. That was not something ladies in waiting typically did, for the record. All of this meant that the new girl, Maomao, had little to possess her other than tasting the food. Besides Hongyang, none of the other ladies in waiting ever asked Maomao to do anything. Perhaps they felt sorry for her, stuck with the most unpleasant job, or maybe they simply didn't want her interfering with their work. Whatever the reason, even when Maomao offered to help, they would politely decline. They would say, "Oh, don't worry about it," and encourage her to return to her room. How was she supposed to settle in here? Confined to her room, she was called to meals twice each day. Once for afternoon tea, and every few days to try one of the lavish banquets offered when the emperor visited. That was all. Hongyang was kind enough to find little tasks for Maomao to do, but they were never difficult and didn't occupy her for long. In addition to her tasting duties, she found her own meals became more elaborate. Sweet treats were offered at tea. When there were extras, they were sent to Maomao. Because she was no longer working as hard as she once had been, all those extra nutrients went to her flesh. She felt like some kind of livestock. Her new appointment as food taster had brought with it another thing Maomao didn't like. She had always been quite slim. This meant that if a poison caused her to waste away, it would be hard to detect. Furthermore, the dosage of any given toxin that might be deadly was proportional to one's body size. A little extra weight could improve her chances of survival. Maomao believed she could not miss a poison so powerful it would make her waste away. She was confident she could survive an ordinarily fatal dose of many toxins. But no one nearby seemed to share her optimism. They saw a small, delicate girl treated like a disposable pawn and they pitied her. They gave her congee even after she was full, and always gave her an extra serving of vegetables. They remind me of the girls from the brothels. Maomao could be cold and reticent and unsentimental, yet for some reason the women had always doted on her. They always had an extra treat or a bit of something for her to eat. Maomao didn't realize it, but there was a reason people were so inclined to look kindly on her. A collection of scars ran along her left arm. There were cuts, stabs, burns, and what looked like repeated piercings with a needle. To others, Maomao appeared to be a petite and over-thin girl with wounds on her arm. She often had bandages on her arms, and her face was sometimes pale. Occasionally she would faint. People assumed with sadness that her coldness and quietness were a natural result of everything she had endured in her life. She had been abused, they were sure, but they were wrong. Maomao had done all of it to herself. She was most interested in discovering the effects of various medicines, analgesics, and other concoctions firsthand. She would take small doses of poison to become used to them. She had also been known to let herself be bitten by venomous snakes. She didn't always get the dosage quite right, and that explained the fainting. The wounds were also concentrated on her left arm. This was preferable to her dominant limb, her right arm. This wasn't due to any love of pain. It was fueled by the interests of a girl whose intellectual curiosity leaned toward medicines and poisons. It had been her father's burden to cope with her for her entire life. He was the one who taught Maomao her letters. He first instructed her in the ways of medicine. He hoped she would see a way forward in life other than prostitution. He had been obliged to raise her in and around the red light district. By the time he realized he had a very capable student, it was too late. The accusations about him had already begun to spread. Only a few people understood what had happened, but most turned cold, hard gazes on Maomao's father. They did not imagine that a girl of her age might harm herself while experimenting, and so the story seemed complete. After suffering long abuse at the hands of her father, this poor child had been sold to the rear palace. There she would be sacrificed to discover poison in the consort's food. A sorrowful tale indeed, and one of which the protagonist was entirely unaware. I am going to be a pig at this rate. Just as Maomao began to fret about this particular possibility, her woes were compounded by a most unwelcome visitor. "It is rather late for you," Consort Jayukayu said as a newcomer entered the room. The caller was the nymph-like eunuch, and this time he had one of his compatriots with him. The handsome young man clearly made regular visits to the chambers of the higher-ranking consorts. Maomao tasted the sweets the companion had brought, possibly poisoned, then quietly moved behind Consort Jayukayu, who was resting on a chaise longue. Maomao was standing in for Hongniang. Hongniang had gone to change the princess's diaper. Though these men were eunuchs, they still needed a lady in waiting to be granted an audience with the consort. Yes, word has come that the barbarian tribe has been successfully subdued. Has it? And what will happen now? Jayukayu's eyes glowed with curiosity. This subject was enough to excite the interest of a bird trapped in the cage of the rear palace. Jayukayu was the emperor's favorite, but she was still young. Maomao understood that Jayukayu was only a couple or 3 years older than herself. "I'm not certain it's appropriate to discuss this in front of a lady such as yourself," Jayukayu said boldly. "I wouldn't be here if I couldn't endure both the beautiful and the terrible in this world." Jinshi glanced at Maomao, his appraising look quickly vanished. He insisted there was nothing interesting about the subject. He then proceeded to speak of the world outside the birdcage. Some days before, a band of warriors had been sent out. They were sent on information that a tribe was once again plotting trouble. This country was largely peaceful, but issues such as this did sometimes mar its tranquility. The warriors successfully drove back the barbarian scouts who had ventured into the territory. There were hardly any casualties to speak of. The trouble began on the journey home. The food at the encampment was spoiled, and nearly a dozen men suffered from food poisoning. Many others were deeply discouraged. They had gotten the provisions from a village close by just before encountering the barbarians. The villages in this area were technically part of Maomao's nation. However, historically they were not without their ties to the barbarian tribes. One of the soldiers, armed, arrested the village chieftain. Several villagers who attempted to resist were killed on the spot. They were killed for conspiring with the barbarians. The other villagers would learn what would happen to them after it was determined what would happen to their chief. Jinshi took a sip of tea after delivering this summary of events. "That is outrageous." Maomao wanted to grab her head in her hands. She wished she had never heard the story. There were so many things in the world one would be happier not knowing. The eunuch saw the furrow in her brow and turned his fine countenance toward her. "Do not look at me." Ah, if only wishes made things so. Jinshi's lips formed a gentle arch as he took in Maomao's expression. He almost seemed to be testing her with his smile. "Something on your mind?" It was as good as an order to say something, so she had to find something to say. Will it even matter, she asked herself. But one thing was for certain: if she said nothing, then at least one village would disappear off the map of the frontier. "I offer you only my personal opinion," Maomao said, and picked a branch out of a nearby vase in which some flowers had been arranged. This branch had no blossoms of its own. It was from a rhododendron, the same kind of branch upon which Maomao had left her message. She plucked off a leaf and put it in her mouth. "Is it flavorful?" Consort Jayukayu asked. Maomao shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Touching it can cause nausea and difficulty breathing," Jinshi said with a probing look. "And yet you just had it in your mouth." Maomao said to the eunuch, "You needn't fret." She set the branch on the table. "But you see, even here on the grounds of the rear palace, there are poisonous plants." The rhododendron's poison is in the leaves, but other plants contain their toxins in the branches or roots. Some release poison if you burn them. These hints Maomao suspected would be enough to lead the eunuchs and the clever Gyokaiu where she wanted them to go. Despite doubting it was necessary to continue, she did so. When encamped, soldiers make their chopsticks and campfires from local materials, do they not? Ah, Jinchi said, but that Gyokaiu added. It would mean the villagers had been punished unjustly. Maomao watched as Jinchi rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I don't know how important this Jinchi is, but she hoped that he might be able to help in some way, however minor. Hongyang came back with Princess Lingli, and Maomao left the room. Chapter 8 Love Potion. There was the young man with his inhuman beauty and his perpetual divine smile. He even sat elegantly on the cloth-draped sofa in the sitting room. What does he want today? Maomao thought. Her cold detachment was not shared by the three ladies in waiting. They blushed and bustled off to make tea for the guest. Maomao could hear them arguing in the next room. They argued over who would have the honor of preparing the drink. Finally, an exasperated Hongyang made the drink herself. She sent the other three ladies back to their rooms. They went with their shoulders slumped, looking very dejected. Maomao, the food taster, picked up the silver teacup. She gave it a delicate sniff before taking a mouthful of tea. Jinchi had been watching her the entire time. This made her fidgety. She squinted so she would not have to meet his eyes. Most young women would have been quite satisfied to have the attention of such a fine man. Even so, he was a eunuch. But not Maomao. She did not share the interests of most people. Even though she knew Jinchi was intensely beautiful, she still watched him from a distance. Someone gave me some treats. Would you be so kind as to taste them as well? Jinchi indicated a basket filled with baozi. Maomao took one of the buns and pulled it open. She discovered a filling of minced meat and vegetables. She took a sniff. It had a faintly medicinal odor she recognized. It was the same as the stamina booster from the other day. An aphrodisiac, she said. You can tell without tasting it. It is not harmful to say so. Go ahead and take them home with you. Enjoy them. I don't think I could, knowing where they came from. Indeed, I think you might have a visitor this evening. Maomao made sure to sound very nonchalant. Jinchi, who had clearly not expected this reaction, looked at a loss. He was fortunate she did not give him her staring at a worm look. He had given her a bun to taste, knowing there was an aphrodisiac in it. The question remained of who had given him the baozi. Consort Gyokaiu laughed to overhear their conversation, her voice like the tinkling of a bell. Princess Lingli slept peacefully at her feet. Maomao bowed and prepared to leave the room. Just a moment, if you please. Do you need something further, sir? Jinchi and Gyokaiu shared a look, then nodded to each other. It seemed they had already discussed what was happening, and it involved Maomao. Perhaps you could make a love potion. For just an instant, Maomao's eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. What is that supposed to mean? She could not imagine what they wanted with such a thing, but the subject was one she would be more than happy to entertain. Forcing herself not to smile, she replied, I need 3 things: tools, materials, and time. Could she make a love potion? Oh yes, she could. Jinchi wondered what was the matter. His eyebrows furrowed, looking like drooping willow branches, and he crossed his arms. Jinchi was a person of such beauty that some said if he had been born a woman, he could have ruled the country. Indeed, it was believed that if he wished, he could have convinced even the emperor to affirm that gender meant nothing. But this praise brought him no pleasure. Today, as he walked through the rear palace, he had once again been the object of catcalls. 1 middle-ranked consort and 2 lower-ranked consorts had called out to him. Additionally, 2 separate male officials in the palace had done the same, 1 military and 1 bureaucratic. The military official had given him dim sum laced with a stamina tonic. Because of this, Jinchi decided to forgo his rounds tonight and retire to his rooms in the palace. He wasn't slacking off. It was for his own protection. He quickly noted some names on the scroll lying open on his desk. These were the names of the consorts who had called out to him today. Even if the emperor visited her infrequently, it was quite audacious for a woman to invite another man into her bedchamber. Jinchi's list was not an official report, but he suspected they would be even less likely to receive an imperial visit after this. He wondered how many of the little birds trapped in this cage understood that his own beauty was a testing stone for the women of the rear palace. Women were chosen to be consorts based first and foremost on family background. Beauty and intelligence played their part as well. Intelligence was more difficult to measure than the first two qualities. A suitable upbringing was also needed, befitting a mother to the nation. Of course, they must have a chaste outlook. The emperor, with a rather unpleasant adjustment, had made Jinchi the standard for selecting his consorts. Jinchi had in fact recommended both Gyukayu and Lihua. Gyukayu was thoughtful and perceptive. Lihua was more emotional, but she possessed unimpeachable manners. Both had unquestioned loyalty to His Majesty without any untoward feelings. However, consort Lihua now seemed to have no place in His Majesty's adoration. The emperor might have been Jinchi's master, but Jinchi also thought he was terrible.